Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Larry Wooten, and I'm president of North Carolina Farm Bureau. And this morning it is my honor and our privilege to welcome you to the Food Dialogues North Carolina event. We recognize that all of you have taken your valuable time to join us either here in person or the many thousands that are online to hear this morning from food and farming experts, healthcare professionals, scientists, and consumer leaders as they discuss this morning and this afternoon the foods we eat and the farmers who feed us. We believe that today's dialogue, led by our moderator, Linda Loveland, and our distinguished panelists to my left, will be well worth your time. Our purpose today in this event is to provide new information and perspectives that are helpful as you make food decisions for yourself and your family. I take this opportunity this morning to recognize both of our host organizations, the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance and the North Carolina Animal Agriculture Coalition. We thank them as our host for bringing this national signature event series to North Carolina. To learn more about the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance and the North Carolina Animal Agriculture Coalition, please consult your program or visit us online at fooddialogues.com/North Carolina. Before we begin our discussions this morning, I think it's important that we provide some context for the topics the panelists will address today. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a time and in a state where there is abundant access to safe, affordable food. We also have a growing number of organic and locally grown foods in markets and grocery stores across many North Carolina communities. All of this food production is being accomplished by a declining number of farmers, a community that represents less than 1% of our state's total population. As our state's population increases, it is driving up the demand for land and open space. North Carolina is currently losing farmland at faster than the national rate, both in our urban areas and in those rural communities surrounding many of our metropolitan areas. Every day, the global population increases at the rate of roughly 206,000 persons per day. Ladies and gentlemen, that's equivalent to the population of Fayetteville, North Carolina every day, or the population of Charlotte, Raleigh, and Greensboro combined every week. In North Carolina, we are growing in population at the rate of roughly 100,000 persons per year. That is 2,000 persons per week, or as we sit here today, 274 people each day in our state. To feed this growing global population, our farmers will have to produce 100% more food by the year 2050. I believe that it is imperative that we continue to explore, that we continue to discuss the most efficient, the most humane, and the most environmentally sound farming practices both for today and tomorrow. These practices will require continued agricultural research and the use of modern technology to ensure that our consumers have access to safe, affordable, and nutritious foods. Farmers and the agribusiness community certainly recognize these factors. They work hard every day to ensure that the food on your table and on tables around the world is of the very highest quality. North Carolina, as a state is indeed fortunate to have been selected as a site for this Food Dialogues event. Agriculture, as many of you know, and agribusiness is the largest and the most visible industry in our state and in our nation. It is important for our growing population to know and to understand more about what's on our plates, as well as who are our farmers. I thank you again for your attendance here today and for your interest in this subject. Now let me turn this program over to our moderator, Linda Loveland, and our panel of experts. Thank you very much. Linda?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Food Dialogues North Carolina. This is our local edition of the National U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance event series. I'm Linda Loveland from Mix 101.5, the Mix Morning Show, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's panel discussions. Now, our goal with this Food Dialogues event is to provide balanced, insightful conversation to help North Carolina consumers and food decision makers reconnect with the foods we eat and the farmers that feed us. We'll work to accomplish this through two different panel discussions that include farming and food experts and professionals in the field of science and healthcare, as well as leaders in both the retail food industry and local food markets. Now, as moderator, I'm going to be asking questions that have been submitted during registration, and also as a consumer and a mom myself, I've got a few questions that I've been thinking about as well. And all of our questions today will touch on the use of science and technology, modern farming practices, food safety, and how our farmers care for their animals and for our natural resources. Now, we want to hear all of your questions as well for both our live audience and for our online viewers. Please share your questions with us. Now, for all of you in attendance, you've been provided note cards that were on your seats, and we will have team members available to pick those up from you at the end of each row, and we can ask those. Now, for our online viewers, please share your questions through the USFRA Twitter feed. It's at USFRA, using the hashtag FoodD to submit your questions. Now, we know that you have questions, and we want to incorporate just as many of them as possible into our conversation today. We have an awful lot to talk about, so we want to get started. Our first panel is entitled, "What's on My Plate?" North Carolinians want to know more about what they're eating, and this panel will discuss the importance of consumer choice in the marketplace, including organic and conventionally grown foods and the use of science and biotechnology in food production. Our expert panelists will address health and safety concerns related to the food we eat, how food supplies are shaped by consumer demand, and how interested consumers can learn more. So let's let you get to know our panel of experts. So we'll start from my far right, Dr. Tom Irons. He is the Associate Vice Chancellor for Regional Health Services and Professor of Pediatrics at ECU. Welcome. Vicki Allen, Chief Marketing Officer and co-founder of home food delivery organization Carolina Grown. Bo Stone, P&S Farms, and a 2012 USFRA Faces of Farming and Ranching winner and 2012 Conservation Farm of the Year. And turning to my left, Alex Hitt, Peregrine Farms local organic farmer and 2006 Patrick Madden Award winner for Sustainable Agriculture. Welcome. Dr. Greg Copenhaver, Director of Graduate Studies, the Biology Department at UNC Chapel Hill. And finally, Richard McKellogg, Director of Produce Merchandising for Lowe's Foods. Now, last week, I got the chance to visit the State Farmers Market. We took a camera crew out there, and we got a chance firsthand to hear from moms and food decision makers about what questions they would ask our panel of experts. I think that's a good place to start. Let's take a look.
So you probably, when you're preparing food for your children, I mean, you have a lot of thoughts. You pay special attention to what you're cooking for them.
I do, and I'm learning more as I go. You know, the more you hear and read and you're on the internet, the more you realize there's a lot more to know.
Do you have any questions that you would like to, like for instance, just taking your food? Is there anything you want to know about the food you're eating?
Sure. I mean, I'm learning more about GMOs and how, you know, what the cattle are fed and how that affects what we're consuming. So I'm curious about that. I always thought it was better that we're eating just produce, you know, more fruits and vegetables. I thought we were doing great by adding that more into our diet, but now I'm learning, well, maybe not. Maybe there's special kind, you know, or organic or not organic, or does it matter? And of course the cost factors in there too, you know, how much you know, more should you pay? How much of a priority should you give that in your budget? So all kinds of questions about that.
Well, I've always thought about if I should buy organic or not and what the difference would be. But, you know, whatever I get, I just try to wash it good and then cook it up like it says and enjoy it.
I guess if I did have any question, it would be with the sort of, whether it's pesticides or GMOs, you know, the genetically modified foods, how long something's been tested, how long it's been theoretically safe before it's actually put out in the market, put out in the grocery stores. Because like I said, I just trust that, you know, there's laws in place, there's regulations in place. If it weren't safe, it wouldn't be sold in the store. But maybe a little more thought could be given, and I would want to know what is the procedure for new pesticides for GMO foods.
I feel like if you buy local and fresh and just expose your children to that, then you can eat healthy. I hear a lot and read a lot about milk, and so milk is the one thing that I do buy organic. Having teenage boys, as I said, I'm noticing a lot of the girls they go to school with might be developing faster and that kind of thing. So, you know, if it's getting into our bodies, and I would ask them, how is it affecting us?
A lot of questions out there, and I encourage you, as you are listening to some of these discussions today, if something comes to mind, please write it down. I have a tendency to forget things, so just do yourself a favor and write down the question. We'll try to get to as many as we can. And there are a lot of questions out there, a lot of choices in the marketplace. As a food buyer, you hear about so many different types of food: organic, non-organic, locally, naturally grown. What do all of these things mean exactly? Let's turn to Alex for this first question. Tell us the basic difference now between organic, non-organic, naturally grown, because it can be kind of confusing.
It can be confusing, and there's a lot of green labels out there that even muddy the water further, I guess. You know, the basic thing with organic versus not is that, one, organic now is, of course, a federally regulated label, but the difference is between the use of synthetic materials and not. In organics, no synthetics are allowed, and they view genetically modified organisms as a synthetic being. And then on the other side, as well with organics, particularly that came in at 2000 with the federal program, is the farmers have to have a farm plan. They have to have a rotation plan. They have to use cover crops. It's a lot more involved than just, can I use this material or not? So it's a little more in depth than otherwise. And then everything else runs downhill from there with natural. And
so what's the difference between, you say, organic and natural?
Well, strictly in the natural, in most products, there is no regulation. There is now a group out of New York called Naturally Grown, and they certify folks throughout the country, and so that's, say, a step down from organic, but they are looking to see what materials are used and how the farm is run and that kind of thing.
So that's not as regulated then as
not
organic,
as regulated,
so to speak. So that's maybe one of the things that can be kind of floating in the middle somewhere.
Exactly.
Huh. Now, since it sounds like there are a lot of steps you have to take to make your farm organic, does that ever factor into what you grow or what you produce?
I think it probably does, because you know, different crops do better in different climates, and so eventually, like any farmer, and Bo will tell you this, is that your farm is suited to grow certain things really well, and so particularly in a certified organic arena, they may say, I just can't grow melons, or I can't grow this because of the environment's just not suitable, and so we end up like we do in all the rest of the country, with certain areas specializing in certain crops.
Are you seeing, what did you grow primarily?
You know, tomatoes are our number one. We do a lot of peppers. We're in pepper season right now. We do quite a bit of lettuce. But there's certain things we don't grow well. We don't grow a lot of the melons and squash and that sort of family well on our farm. And so it's been a matter of trial and error over 30 years.
Now, Bo, you grow a lot of sort of typical North Carolina crops. Was it like soybeans, corn, wheat, that kind of thing? But I think what sets your farm apart a little bit is that I guess you have consumers coming out to your farm, or you have more interaction?
We do. Now, we are a diversified family farm, and our farm is family. It's been in our family for over 6 generations now, and we're proud of that. We are considered a larger farm. We grow approximately 2,300 acres of these row crops, the corn, wheat, and soybeans, that primarily go to feed the animal industry here in our state. The majority of the corn and the soybean meal that is produced from our farm goes to feed the poultry and the swine industries here in our state. But we are a little different in that we do grow produce, and that we have a small roadside stand where we have customers and consumers coming out to our farm, and that we grow strawberries and sweet corn and a few melons and things like that for them there.
What do you have now? Is that organic, or is that?
No, we are not organic. We grow, I guess, more conventionally there. We do use pesticides and synthetic fertilizers and those sorts of things. And I think Alex brought out a very good point earlier, is that organic certification means that you don't use these synthetic pesticides. It doesn't mean that you don't use any pesticides. There's just certain ones that you can and can't use to be certified organically. On our farm and the production that we have, we are not organic, and we do use some of these synthetic pesticides on our farm. It's important to point out that they are regulated, and that each of these pesticides go through a rigorous testing and all from the companies before they're able to reach the market. And then, of course, we are regulated in how we use them, and we have to follow those guidelines.
At your roadside stand, do you find a lot of people are asking you questions about that?
You know, it's become more and more here lately as that becomes, we move more into the information age, and people have these questions, and it's very important to have that conversation with them to let them know not only what we're using, but also why.
Dr. Hines, can you speak to, so many people want to know, okay, is organic that much better for me? Should I, I think you're going to have something, and this could be good. But what is your opinion, though? You specialize, I guess, in pediatrics as well. What is your opinion on using organic versus non-organic and conventional methods? And
I like it. You know, Linda.
Which one?
Yeah, organic. It's delicious. We eat organic food. I reckon Jesus probably ate organic food. You know,
told you it's going to get good.
It is, and I really enjoy locally grown food. I'm a big fan of locally grown food. I buy my produce. We buy our produce from a conventional farm, exactly like yours, in the summertime when we can. I try to treat my patients like I would and do my family. And my children and my grandchildren. I tell people, I can't imagine any farmer that I know who grows anything, any creature or person eats, that he wouldn't feed to his own creatures and his own family. I can't imagine that. So there's not any real difference. And when it comes down to a family budget, buying a conventionally produced agricultural item, I think, is absolutely as safe as organic. All of my in-laws and daughter, my daughter-in-law and my daughter and my 2 daughters-in-law all use organic milk. For the reason that the person at the market was commenting, they're just not so sure, they're fearful of estrogens. That's pretty far-fetched, I think, to think that those things would actually be harmful unless you drank very large quantities, and I reckon there are some 16-year-old boys that do that. But on the other hand, the comment that this person made about puberty coming earlier, the girls are developing earlier, well, for a long, long time, long before the present, the last 50 years, it's been coming earlier in both boys and girls, and girls always develop about a year before boys. I don't think there's any real change there.
And you don't attribute the change in that to either hormones and
no, I'll tell you where this kind of thing can happen. We do see soy products can have some estrogen similarity. That's why a lot of women who eat natural food after menopause eat soy. Or use a lot of soy products and hopefully get a little bit of estrogen effect. Hair products. There are a lot of hair products, particularly that have soy in them. And quite commonly, you'll see a little girl who's getting some development at age 4 or 5, and that's the first thing I ask is, are you using product on her hair, and can you tell me what's in it? And usually now they just get the phone, call up somebody, and find out what's in it. and it almost always has some sort of soy. And you put enough of it on, you put enough of it applied direct to skin, that kind of thing can happen. But I wouldn't think it. I don't think it puts any of my patients at risk. And the honest truth is, the people who feed their children organic milk usually are the people who've got enough money to buy it, and the people who don't, I think they're being very responsible parents when they give them regular milk purchased from Lowe's Foods.
Thank you.
Nice segue. I was just going to talk.
Couldn't have said it any better.
Just going to talk with Richard, representing Lowe's Foods. We had a question submitted by an audience member from registration, and they want to know how large chain food retailers are helping farmers support these types of choices with organic, locally grown, and all that. What is Lowe's doing?
It's a great question. It's also a difficult question. We're a locally owned, family-run business. We've been in business 75 years in the Carolinas, and we've always bought local. It just made sense. I mean, why would you put something on a truck and bring it across country if you could grow it in your own backyard? But the local buzz has really taken off in the last several years. And so we sat down and we looked at everything we did and we said, well, we do that. Maybe we should tell someone that we're doing it. So that caused us to really look at our business strategy as a whole and just really start to ramp up. And then the deeper we got into it, the more we realized that it's really not that simple. Logistics plays a key role in everything. And our company by no means as large as a Walmart or other retailers out there that are selling food, yet still with 102 stores, the logistics of being able to supply all your stores 365 days a year with all the products that your customers want make it very, very difficult. Typically, a buyer or category manager is responsible for supplying products in their category. And I think this is pretty typical in the industry as a whole, that those individuals are going to try and spec out the product needs that they need to cover their stores in the most efficient way possible. So now as you start to drill down to, well, let's buy local, and you say, well, I need X amount of truckloads of product to supply my stores this week, it becomes really burdensome to stop and say, but I have a local farm over here who can supply me with 25 cases of tomatoes, yet I need 3,500 cases.
Sure.
So we've had to rethink how we go about our business, and we have somewhat walked to the cliff and said we think it's the right thing to do. We've allocated more resources to do it, but it is very, very difficult and very, very time consuming as you ratchet down and you start dealing with smaller and smaller farms. But that's the commitment we've made the last 3 years. We've had a lot of success with it. We've created a lot of excitement in our stores. Our store managers have embraced it. Customers have embraced it, but it's a lot of work to get there.
I appreciate everything that you do, because I do shop at Lowe's Foods. Not bring that into the mix, but I appreciate seeing all the locally grown foods that you all offer. And speaking of locally grown, there are so many choices, again, to consumers. Vicki, you are with like a home food delivery service, Carolina Grown. Are you seeing more people ask for this type of home food service delivery? I mean, what got you into this?
We do. We started the business because of filling some needs in the market for just an added convenience factor, because we do home delivery. And we also want to go an extra step. We try to visit the farms that we work with, and that allows us to educate our consumers onto where they're buying their product from, how those farms are operating, and it allows the farms to kind of broaden their network and go into other markets that they may not currently be in, including some smaller farms that might not be able to sell to a Lowe's Foods because they don't have that capacity, but we will take them on and offer what they have. So
a lot of choices out there. It's nice to have those options.
Linda, let me just jump in also. Just one more thing on the local piece is not unlike the definition of natural. The definition of local is very loose among retail businesses.
Like on the continent or something? Or?
Yeah. What'd you say, Northern Hemisphere?
Yeah. I think the consumer needs to sort of ask the store or whatever, what is your definition of local?
Really?
And it may, I know some, like we sell the Weaver Street Market, and theirs is within the state, I think, or 250 miles or something like that. At the farmer's market we sell at, it's 50 miles. Everything has to be grown within 50 miles. And so everyone does have a different definition.
And we define it as being within the state of North Carolina. So that's how we define local for our customers.
Well, that's good to know. Consumers, we're getting a lot of questions too about GMOs in our food, and more specifically what they are, how and why they're used, are they safe, genetically modified organisms. Dr. Copenhaver with the UNC Biology Department, I think that's a good question for you. Tell us a little bit about GMOs.
So I like to tell my students that GMO technology actually started thousands of years ago. So almost every living thing that you eat, or all living things that you eat, take their character and shape from a set of instructions that are encoded by their DNA. And we began manipulating that DNA thousands of years ago when we decided to breed plants together and select specific characters that we were interested in. And we've done that for a long time, and so long that the products that you buy in the supermarket that you're familiar with, if you strolled through the woods, you couldn't find those. You couldn't find something that looked like broccoli or a beefsteak tomato or a big ear of corn. Those are all products of man. Now, many of those are what you would call traditional breeding, but they're still changing that basic intracellular element called DNA. In very recent time, we've learned how to manipulate that more precisely by cutting little bits of it here, moving it over here, and deciding which genes we want in which organisms. But there's no fundamental difference between that precise way of doing it and the more haphazard way of doing it when you do breeding. You can still introduce allergens or weedy properties or any other kind of thing that you might be worried about through conventional breeding, just as you can through GMO technology. So I like to tell my students that really when you're looking at these technologies, you should consider the risk-benefit ratio involved in any kind of technology that you are a consumer of.
It sounds like, I remember from some of my early ag classes in high school, we learned about hybrids, and that's how it sounds like how it started, just crossing two plants, and then now it's just gotten a little more scientific.
It probably first started just by growing a field of plants and saying, wow, that one's bigger, I'm going to save those seeds and plant those again next year, and you did that over enough generations so that what you ended up growing no longer looked like the wild things that you were collecting.
That's why those really big pumpkin seeds are so expensive. Those huge pumpkins, you see, even on the black market.
Indeed.
As weird as that is. All right, so Dr. Irons, now, you talked about organic foods before, and you don't really think, you think it's all pretty much safe for you. What do you think about GMOs?
Well, I have a lot of friends in the sort of granola movement in the world, and I absolutely have no concern at all about GMOs. I can't imagine that eating something eating DNA is just a matter of eating some amino acid sequences, which is like eating protein, which we digest. Now, yes, you can certainly introduce allergens and all kinds of things, just like hybridizing does and doesn't do. Exactly, there's no real difference there. It's just a little more precise. But eating those things, I can't imagine any scientific way, the remotest way that could be harmful to a child or to an adult. And I tell people that, Linda, you can't, people believe things no matter what. The best we can do, and they're going to believe things that we believe might not be scientifically sound, but when they believe them, it's hard to change, and there isn't any sense in getting confrontational about it. I just try to give them the best information I can, and I try to tell people, okay, this is what my grandchildren eat. Of course, they eat a lot of processed food. Squeeze this applesauce down here, squeeze this Go-Gurt in here, whatever. It's a different world. But I try to tell them, give them the best I can, and then let them make their own decisions. And people have their preferences. We love to eat organic food. We love to go to restaurants that serve local food and organic food. But we don't have a problem with eating anything else. And I think it's a matter of farmers respond to demand.
Sure.
We just need to be sure that the practices are in place And the more people know what those practices are, how food is held, how it is transported, under what conditions it's transported, what testing has been done, then the better decisions they can make, the more comfortable they can be about taking a food product off the shelf, taking it home, and eating it.
Are there any health benefits or trade-offs or anything associated with GMOs?
Well, actually, most of the GMO foods that are out there today have what are called input traits. They're things that are designed to help the farmer. They help the farmer avoid crop loss from pests, or they help the farmer better manage the application of things like herbicides. But more and more people are starting to now look at what are called output traits. So trying to put healthy oils into things like soybeans, or vitamin A into rice for regions where you have a lot of vitamin A deficiency. And I think that once consumers start seeing a benefit to them rather than simply the farmers that they're buying from, they might begin to view the issue somewhat differently.
We had a question come from someone too. Can you tell if fresh fruits and vegetables are coming from genetically modified plants? I mean, there's really no way to tell, is there?
There's currently not labeling requirements for genetically modified organisms, no.
And most of the GMO crops at this point are in the commodity line. There's been a few squash and a few other things, some BT sweet corn, but essentially in the vegetable realm and the fruit realm, there's essentially none in the grocery stores. Papaya.
All right. Now, if you have, I've seen some questions come down, by the way. If you have any questions, you want to write those down on your note card and send those to the end of the aisle, and we will get to those. Now, Bo, you said you do a lot of commercially, or for more for livestock or that sort of thing. What the crops you raise?
Yeah, that's right. A lot of the crops that we raise do go to feed our livestock.
And do you use GMO seeds? Do you have any hindrance about that, or does
we do? And I think it's really important for our audience and our consumers of the products to know why we as farmers have so widely adopted these practices. Let's take the corn crops that we grow, and I'm talking about the field corn, not necessarily the sweet corn that you eat at your table, but the field crop that is going to feed our livestock industry. A lot of it is grown with using biotech or GMO modifications there. A good example of that is, and one of the most widely adopted, is the use of BT corn, which BT is a naturally occurring protein that I think is actually registered as an organic pesticide as well. So this is something that has been tested for years and it's naturally occurring, it's safe. It's just been placed into that corn plant so that we don't have to use the pesticides to treat a lot of the insect pressures that we had. So we're using that to actually reduce the amount of pesticides that we would otherwise need to apply on these crops. Corn earworm, some of the root worms, and some of those other insect pressures that we had that would severely cut our yields. Now we wouldn't have to spray those pesticides on them. We've got a naturally occurring protein that we use there. And we do practice stewardship practices where we don't plant this on all of our acres so that we don't try to promote resistance and that sort of thing. Some other of the biotech issues or uses that are out there and that are coming down the pipeline from a lot of our seed companies are also technologies that allow our plants to be more drought tolerant. When you can put a gene in, and we saw last year with the spike in corn prices because of the severe drought in the Midwest that decimated the corn crop, we saw the need for this. You know, Mr. Wooten said earlier in our program that we need to increase by 100% our food production by the year 2050. You know, we've got a responsibility to feed not only our families, but to feed the world really as well. So we need to take advantage of these technologies to increase the yields that we do that. When you have an opportunity to grow a crop with these drought-tolerant genes to where you don't need as much water to make that crop to ensure those yields, it's very important that we use those.
Was it Mr. Wooten said 240 some odd new people are born every day in North Carolina or in the country. So
That's
I mean,
right.
that's in North Carolina. That's
I saw a statistic once that in the next 25 years, we as farmers will have to produce more food than has been produced in the history of the world. So we've got
got your work cut out for you.
Yeah, we've got a tremendous opportunity, and it's one that using these practices and these sustainable practices so that my children will have an opportunity to come back and continue to feed everyone here. I think it's very important to us.
So, well, being an organic farmer, what?
You know, I think from the sustainable ag community side of things, that the initial reaction to GMOs is that the way the initial ones rolled out were not very environmentally sound. It was a silver bullet, certainly, initially, and Bo apparently a little more responsible in using some Bt corn and not some Bt corn to help allay resistance, but through the Midwest they're having incredible resistance now to corn borer worms, and they're having to use heavier and heavier duty insecticides to treat that, and so essentially they've broken that resistance, and so similar with all the Roundup Ready crops, we have all through eastern North Carolina. Bo, I don't know if Bo has on his farm a lot of herbicide-resistant weeds now, so now they're having to go with heavier duty. And this is the case of agriculture through time. We come up with something that looks like it does the job. It does it for 10, 15 years or so, and then the insects and the diseases figure out how to get around it.
And you can have the same kind of resistance from traditional breeding.
Indeed.
And we have for years. And you know, that's a way of, that's a GMO right there, that you know, survival of that species. They found a way to adapt.
Exactly.
No doubt.
And so some of the newer generation of GMOs where they're actually working on drought resistance and some disease tolerances and other things, I think from my standpoint, not speaking for organic farmers, makes great sense. It's the sort of overall picture of environmental sustainability that the concentration in certain crops and certain herbicides or certain pesticides is inevitably not good in the long run. It may look good in the short term. And so that's our biggest concern on that, the eating quality of one thing or another. There is some studies of the issues with the gut of rats and that kind of thing, fed diets of GM. I'm not an expert on that, but
that study has been soundly discredited.
Yeah. So it's more the bigger environmental picture that I think is, and the other issue that a lot of folks have is the concentration of the seed industry that has happened through GMOs, and so a lot of farmers are having a hard time if they want to, say, to save their own seed, to reuse their own seed, and so it's getting to be a narrower and narrower gene pool in some ways. Some ways it's a bigger gene pool.
So would you have a problem then eating food that was produced from a GMO seed?
You know, personally, probably not, but again, I eat so fresh that there's none of there. You know, maybe the tortilla chips I eat maybe has some.
Well, when you're given the choice of what you can buy out there with the organics, non-organics, the natural, involving the GMOs and all of this, this is for Richard and Vicki. There was a recent consumer attitude study that showed 95% of consumers are buying food based on 3 key factors, really: taste, nutrition, and cost. Now, is that ring true pretty much from what you see with the home delivery
Definitely,
service?
definitely. I know with our customer base, I don't know if Richard could say the same thing. He has a larger pool of people to pull from, but it seems that once they get used to what's available locally, then the organic doesn't matter. So then they're looking at cost and quality, quality being the most important to our customers, and I think for most consumers in general as well. So quality is definitely the biggest concern, and then cost obviously is also in there, and people are familiar with what is around and the variety they can have. Then organic and whatever labels attached to it becomes a minor issue for most people.
Would you say the same thing, Richard?
Yeah, I would agree. And I assume the 3 things you read off were not necessarily in that order.
No. Cost has to be a big issue.
Well, we constantly, obviously, as a retailer, I don't care if you're Whole Foods or if you're Walmart at the other extreme, every retailer has to be cost conscious and keeping costs down, and that is a big concern of all of our customers. But as Vicki said, quality, taste, variety, all those things come into play. It's just very, very difficult, once again, to source everything that your customers necessarily want. In Alex's farm, for example, the scale that he grows on and the way he distributes his product, it's fairly narrow, small channel, and it works great for him. In our case, it's once again, it's just the logistics and it's the supply and demand. What drives the cost up of organic product today is that as long as I've been doing this, organic product, the actual need way outstrips the supply all the time. It's all those products that we tried to carry organically, I hear from my stores daily, how come you did not ship this product? How come you did not ship this product? And clearly, 75% of our out of stocks from our warehouse on a nightly basis are organic products. That the demand, once again, is just way, way larger than what farmers can supply. I honestly think that you could get to a point where conventional versus organic, there could be a shift in acreage, and if enough people are growing organically, then that will just become the norm someday. We're not even close to being there yet.
So when it comes to the chains, it sounds like it's organic is the thing, but if you can get it delivered, and I know you have a lot of local too, but when you're with your service, though, it sounds like it's people just want it local. That's a big thing, so that way they know it's fresh.
We definitely have a core of people who are interested in organics, but you know, when people become familiar with products from certain farms, whether you're getting it from a delivery service like Carolina Grown, or you're going to the farmer's market and you're establishing those relationships, and you become comfortable with farms like Bo's farm or Alex's farm, then at that point you know how they operate and what where their ethics lie and all of that, and that becomes part of your food, and that becomes something to people.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and that's what we found for our base. So.
Now, as consumers, we have a lot of choices with what we buy as far as food, but now farmers, with Bo and you, Alex, you also have a lot of choices with what you grow. How do your choices sort of affect the rest of us? Like maybe you all decide to grow one thing, so maybe that's more, but I mean, how does that affect, how does that affect all of us with what you all decide to grow? Start with you, Bo.
Well, of course, on our commercial acres, we utilize crop rotations there. So, and of course, we have to look at several things, economics being a big factor. Are the price levels with fertilizers and seed and different things, do they match up with the commodity market such that we can make a living? Because ultimately we have to be able to buy food as well.
Sure. Well, you were talking about the corn too, though, in the Midwest, how the drought wiped us, so that was an issue.
That's right. So a lot of those decisions we make because we are trying to have a good crop rotation and keep that same acreage mix. Now, with the produce side of our business and with our roadside stand, we have pretty much settled on a core group of products that fit our business and our model from a time standpoint. We can grow the strawberries in the spring, and that fits the time where we can have the time to devote to them and devote to that market. And we do grow other things that are ready with the strawberries. We have onions, and we have squash and potatoes and okra and different summer type vegetables that are coming along there that we can sell with our sweet corn. So yes, we're conscious of those decisions, but it's more that we've developed our market to the point that we know our consumers and customers want these things, and so we know that we're going to grow them on an annual basis.
Alex, do you have a lot of choices too to make?
We do, and of course it's a lot different than, Bo is living in both worlds. He's in the commodity world where not only, of course, he has hogs, and I assume some of your stuff is going to your hogs, or are you sending it all?
No, our hogs, we are contracted with Murphy Brown's.
So he's really weighing, in the commodity world, he's really weighing not only, of course, right now they're at record prices for corn and soybeans, so that's good.
No, not now.
But
maybe a year ago, but I can trust you, not now.
But they're having to weigh a lot of factors, and particularly inputs, and the other end is, of course, they have to borrow a lot of money to do that, so they have to weigh that cost of doing that. On our end, our entire business is consumer driven, kind of like Vicky's, and we've been at it a long time, but our customers tell us what they want and what they like, and because 70% of our food goes across the table at farmers market, and I know the people who are eating it, and they'll tell you quick if they don't like it. And so, or they'll say, can you grow a red one or a green one or a blue one or a pink one? And so we grow what they want, and because we're maximizing, we're so small and have such finite amount of land, we have to maximize everything we have. So there's no lost leaders in the
Alex hit on a great point there, and that's one of the beauties of agriculture, not only in our state but in our country. If the consumers want it, the farmers will grow it. I had a gentleman who was in the swine industry. He told me one time, he said, Bo, if they want pork chops in blue boxes with pink bows, if they're willing to pay for it, we'll give them pork chops in blue boxes and pink bows. And I think that's important to know that as consumers we have these choices, and that we can. when we let folks know what we want, we're gonna have that opportunity.
Yeah,
it does come with a cost, obviously, and it's one of the other things that we do have great rules and regulations in business in place. We need to make sure that we don't over-regulate so that the small growers that cost of production doesn't put them out of business. So we need to make sure that everything that we have in place is done in the way it should be, so that folks like Alex and myself with our produce business can afford to stay in business, so that we aren't just being sourced by folks that can handle all 102 stores.
I think that attention to consumer choice is actually going to be very important for the future of GMO foods as well. So for example, there's a really interesting project in Georgia where there's a scientist, and she's trying to remove the allergens from peanuts. So people with these very strong peanut allergies can enjoy a food that the rest of us enjoy. And I think that that's a really interesting example, because that's a classic sort of scary thing when people think about GMO foods is, oh, what if you end up with an allergen like a peanut allergen in a food that I don't normally associate that with? Well, the same technology can be used to take away those allergens as well. And when we start introducing those kinds of choices to consumers, I think that's going to make a big difference.
Going back again to it, like I said, GMOs, I think sometimes when people hear GMOs, genetically modified organisms, it sounds kind of scary, and you've been talking about how it's really not, it doesn't have to be that scary. But with the growing population, is it possible to feed everybody without using GMOs? I mean,
I think it's going to be very challenging to, when you project the numbers like President Wooten was talking about, not only the population growth numbers, but the dwindling land on which we grow those calories. And 70% of our water, as Bo was talking about right now, is used for agricultural purposes. Yet every year we lose more of that water to salination, and we can't use it for those purposes. And so all of these resources that we depend on to feed this growing population are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So that means that the plants that we grow and the animals that we grow are going to have to be more and more and more efficient. And we are starting to enter a phase in many of our staple crops where the gains we're making from traditional breeding are flattening out. We're still making gains, but they're not at the same steep part of the curve that they've traditionally been on. And so I think if we're going to keep pace with the population and the dwindling resources, we're going to have to rely on modern technologies.
Alex?
Well, my understanding is, for instance, FAO says that we already produce enough food for 9 billion people. And sometimes it's not in the right place, and sometimes it's not by the right people. And so a lot of the focus of at least the growing population needs to be as much who's growing the food and where it's being grown as much as what kind of it is. But there's also the papaya as a case in point, which is why they've done GMO on that. But so I think, sometimes we rush to this, we got to feed this huge population where maybe we already have enough. But I think also if you look at most yield statistics, again, I'm not an expert on this, but with corn and soybeans, and a lot of it is fairly similar depending on the year. Really, really bad years, GMO may come out better. Normal years, it's fairly even on corn and soybeans. Cotton's even higher. Organic cotton produces more than regular cotton in most years.
I think Alex brings up an excellent point, and that is when you think about things globally, it can actually obscure local problems. And so there are regions of the world where if you think globally about the amount of calories we produce, you think, well, why can't we just move all these calories from the Midwest down to sub-Saharan Africa? And there are any number of distribution and political problems and monetary problems with doing that. And so I think that GMOs can be a part of that solution by offering tailor-made crops to help local populations. And I think that golden rice is an excellent example of that, where there are populations where people get most of their calories from a single staple crop, rice. And as a result, they have vitamin A deficiencies and that affect children. Dr. Irons can probably talk more about the results of vitamin A deficiency. But we can tailor crops to those regions with those deficiencies to help those people directly, right? And that gets back to the local aspect that we all support.
Just out of curiosity, what's in the future for GMOs? Can you speak to Just basically speaking, what can we look forward to, or what's coming?
Personally, I think the most important transition is going to be transitioning from a focus on those input traits that help the farmer to output traits that help the consumer, and especially address local problems for consumers.
Anything specific as far as the traits? You mean as far as getting vitamins, like you said, the enriched rice and all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can add vitamins. I think you can make oil content more healthy in a lot of staple crops like soybeans and rapeseed that are grown in parts of the world. And then I think there are more exotic examples where people are looking at producing vaccines in plants that can be grown locally, where distributing and transporting modern vaccines like you and I would get at a doctor's office just isn't practical. But if you can produce it in a banana, you might be able to vaccinate a kid against a deadly disease.
Wow. It sounds like with you, Dr. Enzo, when it comes right down to it, it's if you're eating healthy, the key is just to get people eating healthy, whether it's, depending on what it comes from, organic or natural. But I mean, the key is to just get fresh food and eat well.
The best that we can. The majority of we're looking at a group of people who I dare say would never have a problem buying whatever it is they want to feed their families. The majority of the patients that I see every day and every week in our clinics and with the medical students and residents are low-income families who do not have those choices, not going to be able to. So I've got to advise them differently about how to just be sure it's safe, how to vary their diet, spend more time trying to keep them from depending upon the various fast food outlets for the quick, lots of calories meal than anything else, because it really is. It's cheaper for them. It is cheaper for them. We can do it, but it takes marching them down to Lowe's Foods with a nutritionist or some trained layperson to walk them and say, this is how you do this. This is where you can get this cheaper. This is how you can get this cheaper. Or buying locally, they can do that too. Or growing some of their own. Then, at least in February of the year, which is rainy season over there, I'm in sub-Saharan Africa, Southern Africa. I'm in Zambia, taking care of children there. They depend primarily on maize for corn. That is where they get the vast majority of their calories. They are vitamin deficient. If they live in the bush and they're not immunized against measles, and if they're vitamin A deficient, they're much more likely to die of measles than they would have been if they weren't. So these kinds of things are real to those people, and our farmers have to be thinking about those things too, and our scientists are thinking about those things too. So it varies with where people are, but we want them to do the best they can to get what they can of the balanced diet into them within their economic constraints.
I grew up on the farm, so I'm very familiar. Yeah. We had our own garden. We always had fresh produce, and we were very fortunate that way, but there are so many fewer family farms. And a lot of us still will try to grow some tomatoes in the backyards or do what we can, but so many people just don't have the advantage of having their own farm anymore. I mean, all of you, as a farmer being involved in this today, with our discussion, what's on my plate, what would you like to let people know maybe about the food that they're getting? Bo, do you want to start with you? What would you like to tell people?
I would be glad to. Number one, I am proud to be a family farmer. Over 95%, some will say it's close to 99% of our farms are owned by families, so they are family farms. They may be larger scale than what we remember that grandmama and granddaddy had, and a lot of people are 2 to 3 generations removed from the farms. But the main thing that I would like for people to know about our farm and what we're doing is that we are trying to look after that next generation. Anything that I grow on our farm, from our produce to our livestock side, I am proud for my children to eat that. I don't mind my kids going to the strawberry patch and filling up after school when they stop by there. We're making sure not only that for my kids, but that for your kids, we're doing what we know to do, which is grow the food that they want to eat.
Right. Vicki?
I think a big thing that people can do is if you haven't had, your own little garden plot, even if you're on, in an apartment, you can kind of grow on the patio or whatever, then go visit a farm. Talk to people, get immersed in that, and learn, what is available locally, how to cook it, so you can try to avoid some of those processed foods as well, and just try to keep your mind open to what is available, whether through a grocery chain or a local roadside stand, or going directly to the farm, you know, going to see Bo or somebody like that. So the best thing we can do.
All right, Dr. Hines?
Well,
Get ready. It's coming.
No, what I would like people to know about what they eat and what I think about it is that what I would want them to do is to know that, to be able to be confident based upon their knowledge, based upon their information which they've received, that what they're feeding their families is nutritious and safe and has been handled in a safe manner. I want them too to know, I badly want them to know the people who grow them and how they're grown, the realities of it. When we eat animals, those animals have to live and die for us to eat them. And that's just the reality. To understand that and to understand it, that's what human beings do, at least those of us who are not vegetarian. And once they understand that and understand that we're all on this planet dependent upon one another and dependent upon this generation for the health of the next generation and for the water quality and for the food security, whether it's here or in Southern Africa, that we're all in this together. We're neighbors, and we ought to be learning as much as we can about our neighbors, supporting one another, and where there are problems, confronting them openly and in a civilized way.
Okay. I should have come to you last. That was a nice donation. Remember that next time. Richard.
I think regardless of what kind of food you buy or where you buy your food, I think Dr. hit the nail on the head, is that everybody has different means, and you have to look at your own personal situation and make personal choices. And all the things we have discussed today, whether it's GMOs or local or organic, feelings run deep for folks. I don't eat organic produce. I'm in the produce business, but I have a daughter who swears by it. She didn't get that from me. And so I think all produce is safe. I don't think anybody in this industry wants to go out and put a product out there that's not safe. That's their livelihood. They understand that people ingest it. And so I think it's a personal choice.
Yeah, that's what it is. There are a lot of choices out there,
Yeah.
which is a good thing. Dr. Copenhaver?
I'd like to sort of emphasize two things. One is, you know, I could tell you I'd be happy to eat genetically modified foods, but I do a lot of things that aren't great for me. I sometimes drink scotch, sometimes I drive my car too fast. But what I can tell you is that I have, you know, 2 young children, and I would be happy to feed them GMO food, and I would do anything to protect them, right? So that's the level of confidence that I have in the technology. The other thing that I want to emphasize is that, you know, you guys and all of you listening and watching out there are amazing people, because you're taking time out of your day to educate yourselves. And that's the most important thing. The choices that you make as individuals are your choices, and I respect those choices. But the thing that I would ask people to do is base those choices on data and on education and on facts, rather than hearsay or just gut reactions. So those are the things that I would part with.
Alex?
You know, I always say, and Bo probably will agree with this, it's an exciting time to be in agriculture, because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of science on all sides that are leading us down some really exciting roads, and people are coming back to food. We went through a generation or two after the war that it was all good to have out of a can and no one knew how to cook. And now what's driving Vicky's business and even Bo's produce business and your business is that people are really interested in food, both from a quality of life standpoint, but from a nutrition standpoint. And we see it at Farmers Market. Sometimes we're into 3rd generation now of people who have grown up coming to market with their parents, and this is how they do now, because they didn't used to know how to do that. And some of it is their gardening, and some of it is their cooking more, and some of it is the cooking channel, and there's too many cooking shows. But whatever the case might be, folks are really coming back to food and thinking about it in a different way that I think is driving a really great time to be in agriculture and to be in the food business.
And it's a great time to be a consumer. All you have to do is walk through the State Farmers Market or anywhere, and you see all the choices that are available to us. So we really owe it to everyone in the agriculture business for bringing all that to us.
Right.
I mean, it's been fantastic. So, well, let's open up now to get some questions. A little Q&A session. Now, these questions that we're going to be asking have been provided by both our live audience and from those of you watching online that are streaming it. And helping us with these questions, we have a couple people who are going to come up and read these. Deborah Johnson, CEO of the North Carolina Pork Council, and Bob Ford, Executive Director of the North Carolina Poultry Federation. All right, Bob, do you want to read our first question?
Okay, our first question is from our audience. Why has Europe outlawed GMOs if they're okay? What do they know that we don't know?
Yeah, that's actually a loaded question, and I actually teach a whole class on that subject.
Well, you got a minute 30.
Yeah. So I would say that there are two main things. One is that the time at which GMOs were being introduced into Europe was a tough time in Europe because two things had happened. There had been HIV tainting of the blood supply there, and people were very, very scared about mad cow disease. And in both of those cases, the European authorities didn't do a very good job educating, informing, and protecting their society. And as a result, they lost confidence in the system, including the scientists. And so they were primed to dislike or be suspicious of new technologies. And then on top of that, there was enormous pressure of global companies that were based in the United States who were threatening smaller scale production of food in most of Europe where there is not a lack of supply. And so they saw that as an economic threat. And so a lot of that response was economic protectionism. And so actually I don't think they know anything that you don't know. I just think that they live in a different economic environment than you do.
Deborah?
This question also is from our audience here. What are the environmental effects of growing organically versus conventionally, and should consumers care?
Bo and Al?
Which one of us?
We'll both hit it if you want.
That's right.
That's right.
And of course, I always like to say that what we 30, 20 years ago, Larry would probably agree with this, what agriculture looked like then is not what it looks like today. And what we always called conventional agriculture has moved a long way along the spectrum towards, I mean, Bo's using 100% no-till, I think, on your...
That's correct.
So, but environmentally, I would say that what really works in an organic system is that we have to be really diverse, both in our crop choices and in our rotations, and that's really our number one tool that we have. And so we're always constantly thinking about the health of the soil and the health of the ecosystem around and the materials we're using. And so in a lot of ways, it's a more balanced system. But then there are, you know, I have been castigated before for saying that, you know, sometimes no-till corn with a shot of Roundup is more environmentally sound than organic corn where they have to go in and till and plow and till and cultivate. And so for the soil health, maybe not as good. Now the other stuff they may apply to the corn, not so good on conventional. But so that's a balance. It's always a balance there, but we're always trying to make it the most balanced system we can in organics.
I'd like to tell a little bit about the environmental techniques that we're using in large-scale agriculture, things that we're doing on our farm to be environmentally friendly. We are doing studies, and we have a pilot project with the Natural Resource Conservation Service to where we have put in underground drip irrigation to where we are trying to prove at what level of water usage can we produce the same number of crops. Now we're 3 years into this and I don't have all the data yet, but it looks like that we can possibly produce the same bushels per acre with this versus center pivot irrigation and utilize about half of the water. So that's one of the things. From a growing of the crop standpoint, we do utilize 100% no-till farming, which means that we don't disturb the soil. We're not going in with the disc and the plow and creating erosion and blow off of the dust from the soil. So that's another one of the things. We're utilizing the technologies that we have, such as the GPS technology and the satellites, to where we actually take and we have maps of our farms on the computer, and we've downloaded the soil maps. You may not realize it, but dirt is different. And we have, in a 50-acre field, we may have 8 or 9 different soil types. And we have identified those zones, and that we're able to go and using that satellite technology to sample each area of the farm or field that is different. And we collect that information and that data, and we have the soil analyzed. Well, then we use this same satellite and GPS technology and the computers that we have to write a prescription where we actually give that part of the field exactly the amount of fertilizer that it needs. And again, we're using the satellite and the computers in the tractor, which are actually satellite guided these days. So you can tell we're a long ways from plowing
GPS
a mule
on your tractors now?
That's correct. They're guided by satellites, and as we go across the field through the computer program that we have written and that we have in that tractor, it changes the amount of fertilizer that it puts out as you go across the field, so that each area of that farm and that field gets exactly what it needs.
So you're not overdoing it, is the thing.
It's very environmentally friendly because none of that fertilizer then is subject to runoff or to leaching. It's utilized by the crop. Our production has gone up because each area is getting exactly what it needs. We use that same technology to yield map so that when we run across with our harvester, we know what area, each area of the field is able to produce. We've taken that information to where we're now even varying the rate of seed that we put out per acre so that we can be more productive on each acre of ground. So we're utilizing these technologies to be more environmentally friendly and more environmentally conscious, and therefore to be sustainable. We have a slogan on our farm that we are growing the next generation, and that means a lot of different things to different people. We are growing the next generation of biotech and genetically modified crops. We're doing that, but to us, it's our family. You know, I mentioned that I'm the 6th generation farmer. I do hope that one of my 3 kids is the 7th, if not all of them. So if I'm not utilizing practices that makes that farm better for them, how can I attract new farmers to come back to the farm? So that's what we're doing.
Well said.
It's a lot of fun.
And you seem very passionate about it, too. No, you're done.
Oh, I'm done.
No, I'm kidding. Go ahead and add something.
And you know, it sort of both speaks to the thing I said where agriculture has moved so far, because he does on a large scale what we do on a small scale.
That's right.
We soil test every field every year. We apply exactly what is told us. We monitor all the yields exactly, and we're increasing population of plants and everything else. So it's, you know, it's not that far apart. Just bigger. He's got bigger tractors. He can watch the soap operas.
His tractor's bigger than yours.
Yeah. His is directed. He can watch the soap operas while he's plowing. I have to like pay attention.
Bob, do you have another question for us?
Our next question comes from our friend Twitter, from the cloud, I guess. Can GMO techniques be used to make food healthier?
Absolutely, I believe so, and that gets back to the emphasis that I was placing on transitioning from input to output traits. And so there are several projects out there at many universities and at many companies who are trying to add nutritional value into both staple crops and other crops so that you can increase the amount of vitamins, the amount of healthy oils, the amount of antioxidants, and other kinds of things that you guys would all like to have more of in your diet, but don't necessarily want to eat the plants that naturally produce them. So, yes.
Deborah?
Linda, we've had some great questions here today, and unfortunately we're not going to be able to answer all of them, but we want you to know that we will try to follow up, and we'll be sharing a little bit later our Facebook page as well as our website of the North Carolina Animal Agriculture Coalition, so we can follow up on all these good questions. But here's another good one. Why is there an increase in gluten sensitivity?
Wow. I don't know, maybe for Dr. Irons?
That's sort of like asking why is there an increase in autism. You know, only that one would suddenly cause certain people in the audience to start to twitch and maybe want to come up and put up the dukes and stuff like that. So I won't get into that. The fact of the matter is that
there's no easy answer.
That's been happening for a very long time, and it has a lot to do with diagnostic skill and so forth, or increased level of diagnosis. I think the same is true of gluten. We always knew what celiac disease was. It was an uncommon disease, which we saw classic symptoms of lots of gastrointestinal problems and weight loss and so forth due to the gluten. Classic appearance of the small intestine when you'd go in there and biopsy it, washed off like the villi, that are those nice things that increase the absorption, are gone. You know, it's grape flat. That was celiac disease. Some people had it and they had to avoid gluten. Well, now we realize that there are a lot more people who are sensitive to gluten who don't have that degree of symptoms. And part of it's diagnosis. Secondly, people are eating a lot of gluten, and over time, it seems to me to be, and gluten is in a lot of different foods.
More than you think.
Yeah, a lot more. Yeah, it's nothing like reading the labels to learn about gluten, and milk's another one. You know, various milk solids. You go to the grocery store and buy rice milk, you better read the label carefully because there's some milk protein, it's casein in there in a lot of times. So wheat is in a lot of different foods, especially processed foods, and people have a lot of exposure. So I expect that's part of it. The world has changed environmentally so much, and there's so many things that are happening to us that we don't understand. And I know, and who's more concerned about exposure to pesticides than anybody I know? Farmers. It's both. Golly, but we have a lot of things that that end up in our water and that are clearly not good for us, and we've changed as a result of that. We have to engage in more responsible practices to get that different. But perhaps that's enough for me to say.
Well, since Dr. Copenhaver, since you were talking about maybe trying to reduce the peanut allergen, is this something that can be
I think
with biotechnology?
There are naturally low gluten wheats available. In fact, the soft or hard wheat varieties that you might use in a bread versus a cake, the big difference in that is the amount of gluten. And so it's certainly a genetic trait that you could try to change over time, either by traditional breeding or by GMO technologies. Yeah.
Okay, Bob, anything else?
This question is, we've discussed in depth the values of fresh produce. Can you speak about the importance of frozen, canned, or further processed foods?
So the importance that
I think they should be discontinued. I'm all about fresh.
Well, I'll tell you, there's a time when frozen produce can be really nice. Some frozen broccoli and some other things like that in the middle of the winter time. There's nothing like having it in the freezer. Some frozen cut green beans and that sort of thing can provide some nutritious additions when we don't have enough root vegetables to serve or whatever. So I find it, I'm not as much into the can, but when it comes to making chili and putting some beans in there, pour them in.
Dump them all in.
Dump them all in.
All right, well, fantastic. Well, we hope that you all have enjoyed the discussion of our first panel. We've got lots of great questions, lots of great answers, new insights and perspectives on how your foods are grown and why. And we encourage all of you that have joined us live and online to visit fooddialogues.com to learn more about these topics and to keep this dialogue growing. Now, for those of you who are watching online, we will be taking an hour lunch break. Sorry you can't join us, but our next panel is called Who is My Farmer? And it starts promptly at 1:15 Eastern Time. We hope you will rejoin us at that later time. Now, for those of you who are here in our live audience at the Raleigh Convention Center, lunch is now being served, and we encourage you to start making your way back into the conference room back in here by 1 o'clock. So thank you all for joining us for part one, and we hope you enjoy your lunch.